happened to look at the cover of the lifeboats. It looked like red blood.
In the case of missing honeymooner George Smith.
That's when I heard a horrific thud.
Missing, presumed dead.
She had no idea what happened. I'm not letting her go to jail.
Hi everyone, my name is James, and today we are going to look at another horrible case. The Aegean Sea presents a calm and soothing effect for everyone who has ever experienced it. On one of the trips on the Royal Caribbean cruise ships, a lovely couple, Jennifer and George Smith, were on board. As they stood on the deck of the ship, taking in the majestic view of the vast sea spread before them, the lovebirds who had just gotten married were set to begin their new life with each other. Everything seemed perfect as Jennifer rested in the arms of her beloved. Unknown to them, something deeply mysterious was about to change the lives of the couple forever. At about 8 a.m. on July 5th, 2005, a 16-year-old Emily, who was also on board the Royal Caribbean while preparing for another exciting day on the cruise, was shocked by what she saw just outside her cabin. Not too far away, on a canopy-like shelter, she saw what appeared to be blood on it. Disturbed by this strange phenomenon, Emily did what any responsible person would do by reporting this to the officials on board. With time, other passengers on board the luxury ship became aware of this obvious ominous sign, and soon an animated exchange of possible theories filled the air. The blood marks appeared as though someone had been injured and stood at that spot for a while before something much worse had happened. It was unclear what had transpired, but the horrific sight was going to create one of the most sensational news headlines across international media for a long time. There were so many suspects. The version of what really happened was so different from one suspect to another, and those suspects were clearly hiding some things. Some people say it was a robbery, others a passion crime, or even a premeditated murder. Suspect interrogatories were incoherent. Investigators were lost. This is how the story of the newlyweds, who simply wanted to spend their first moments together and have a memorable time, unfolds. George Smith was the perfect gentleman, soft-spoken, and a well-brought-up young man. Born to loving parents in Connecticut, George grew up in the comfort of a safe home with his siblings. His father, George Smith Sr., owned and ran a liquor store, and the younger George wholeheartedly worked in the family business. His passion for business saw him graduate from Babson College in Wellesley, Massachusetts in 2000. In the years that followed, he worked in Boston as a business analyst, but his passion for the family's business soon crept upon him, and shortly thereafter, he quit his job and returned to take over the business that he had always loved, where he had honed part of his business skills. With George's interest in this business, he set his heart on growing the family's enterprise so his beloved parents could get their much-deserved retirement. Sometime in 2002, during a school reunion, George met the bold, beautiful, and ambitious Jennifer, who would eventually become his wife. It was love at first sight, and the two quickly formed a romantic bond. George's parents were also happy about this relationship and didn't hold back their support when the duo decided to spend the rest of their lives together. 3 years later, in 2005, in one of the most beautiful wedding venues in Newport, Rhode Island, George and Jennifer were joined in holy matrimony. The beautiful venue, which overlooked an open expanse of water, seemed to be a premonition of what would eventually lead to the life-changing event that rocked the new family. Shortly after the wedding, the couple decided to go on their honeymoon on a luxury liner belonging to the Royal Caribbean. On June 29th, in Barcelona, the new couple began a 12-day trip that stretched from Barcelona through Turkish territories and to other Italian towns. They later met a younger man, Josh Atkins, who was a lively and humorous companion. George quickly struck up a friendship with Josh, and soon the couple began to spend time together. On the first day of the trip, the couple spent a significant part of the day together. Some of their activities included trying out Italian cuisine, swimming in the Aegean Sea, and touring ancient towns. In the days that followed, the couple, Josh, and some of his friends grew even closer. It was easy to see why because of Josh's outgoing and extremely friendly nature. Later that evening on the liner, after a great meal, George and his wife, in the company of Josh, decided to visit the casino on the cruise ship. As George enjoyed the fun there, his wife decided to try out her gambling skills at poker. This didn't go so well, as she ended up losing quite a good sum of money. However, this did not bother them. They were having such a good time on board this liner that the lost money didn't appear to be a big deal. After more games and moments of laughter, the casino closed for the night, but the adventurous couple was not done with their fun and continued to spend time together, coming up with whatever fun things they could to pass the time. The last footage of George was captured at about 2 a.m., and it showed him leaving the casino. Sadly, he would never make it to his cabin. By the morning of the 5th day in June, something awful had happened. George was missing. Jennifer was also nowhere to be found. Alarmed by this morbid development, in addition to the presence of bloodstains that the young Emily had seen, it was obvious that something had happened to George and his wife. Something that involved acts of violence. This is because suspicious footprints and marks were left all over the scene where the blood was spotted. A search party was quickly put together as every possible area of the ship was searched. George's cabin, which was on the 7th deck, was cordoned off, and the rest of the passengers were restricted from moving around the ship. The young couple, who appeared to have been having the time of their lives just a few hours ago, were suddenly missing. What could have happened to them? The natural assumption was that they probably fell overboard, but the ship officials could not shake off the feeling that whatever happened to them was no mere accident. In a shocking twist of events, Jennifer was later found at about 10 a.m. at a spa. When she was asked about the whereabouts of her husband, her looks of shock and surprise suggested that she was unaware of his disappearance. She also said that she had not seen him since the previous night. She further said that when she woke up that morning, she didn't find her husband in bed. However, she was not worried, as she knew that George had spent a larger part of the night with their new friends. She therefore assumed that he was probably with them and simply went to the spa, not nursing the slightest idea that something might have happened to her beloved husband. Later that afternoon, the Turkish authorities came in to investigate. Their first and primary suspect was none other than Jennifer. As they questioned her, she repeated the story of not seeing her husband since the previous night and appeared ignorant of what might have happened to him. Unfortunately, some officials of the ship later came to tell her that George was missing and that something sinister must have been responsible for his disappearance. As the investigations commenced, cabin 9062, which was the couple's, was carefully searched by the investigators. Here, they were shocked by the state of the cabin. It was completely turned over. It appeared as though someone had ransacked the room in a bid to find or cover up something. Tiny blood stains were also noticed on a towel, and this blood was identified as George's. From the footprint marks in the room, it was clear that not only George had been in that room, but he had also been subjected to extensive trauma before he disappeared. The marks close to the boat railings just outside the cabin also left investigators questioning if he had fallen over. In any case, this would not be an easy case to deal with. There were too many suspects and mysteries surrounding the disappearance of George. Elementary investigations began with the young men that George had been with before his mysterious disappearance. As the team of investigators thought long and hard about how best to reconstruct the events that led to this obvious tragedy, the boat officials were questioned. They told the Turkish authorities that George and his wife were very drunk and that at some point they had taken him back to his cabin. Once here, they took off his shoes and laid him in bed. However, they had no idea where his wife was at the time and assumed that she later came back to the cabin on her own. Atkins also gave his account when questioned. However, he added quite a twist to his story when he told the detectives that he noticed Jennifer had left the casino with a man that she was obviously attracted to. From his statements, he inferred that Jennifer might have been romantically involved with this casino worker called Lord, and that Jennifer didn't even hide her attraction to the man. However, CCTV footage revealed that a very drunk Jennifer staggered out of the casino at about 3:30 a.m., leaving her equally drunk husband with his newfound friends. Lord left the casino 5 minutes earlier. His girlfriend, who was awakened by him, also confirmed that he returned to the cabin at that time of the morning. Again, his keycard proved from the entry logs that he was telling the truth. This inaccurate report from Atkins was enough to deepen the detective's suspicions about him. Why did he lie? Did he know what had happened to George? And if he did, why was he keeping the truth from the authorities? As the investigation deepened, it raised more questions than answers, and more twists, suspects, and motives were uncovered as the authorities raced to solve the mystery before them. The next phase of the investigation would include more names. These included 3 Russians on board the ship, in the persons of Greg Rosenberg, Zach Rosenberg, his cousin, and their friend, Rusty, all with American passports. These youngins were all companions of Josh and also formed part of the friendly gang that had gone along with George and Jennifer to gamble at the casino. After trying out their hands at poker and losing some money, every one of them got drunk while trying out other gambling stunts. This continued until the casino closed at 2:30 a.m. Still unsatisfied with their night adventures, they all moved to a disco hall, where they continued to drink and dance around. At some point, the cruise officials decided that the boys and their friends couldn't handle more alcohol, so they were refused more drinks or any other form of service. Atkins decided to get a bottle of absinthe that he had gotten during their tour. Although the liner forbids passengers from drinking their own alcohol, Atkins had smuggled this exceptionally strong drink on board. He told the boys about this alcohol, and George even helped conceal the bottle from the cruise officials. Much later that morning, when it was all quiet, a janitor noticed Greg, Josh, Zach, George, and Rusty drinking their own bottle of alcohol. The janitor, in his statement, also said that after this, he later found Jennifer staggering around. He was forced to help the young woman to the elevator and noticed that she had turned in a different direction instead of going to her room. Other witnesses said that Jennifer had been so drunk that she leaned upon Lord, the casino manager, at some point. Also, some people said that she had a bit of an argument with George and even hit him. It is not clear if she did this playfully, as they were both too drunk to have engaged in any form of meaningful scuffle. After turning in the wrong direction, a group of patrolling officials later found Jennifer sprawled on the walkway, fast asleep. In the company of a female duty officer and some guards, she was wheeled back to her cabin, which was empty as George was not around. At this time, it was already past 4 a.m. and almost 5 a.m. Something of note stood out, however, in the cabin. Despite the wind, the curtains by the balcony were not moving. Did this mean that someone was behind them? Could this have been George? Did he manage to somehow wake up and make his way to the balcony after he was taken to his cabin? Not very far from the couple's cabin were a deputy police chief, Hyman, and his wife sleeping. They were later awakened by the ongoing noise from cabin 9062, and he said he had pounded on the wall of his cabin and yelled at the noisemakers to keep the noise down. Some brief moments of silence followed before the noise continued for a few minutes. He recalled hearing one of the people say good night, as though he wanted his visitors to leave. More disturbing noise followed, such as the sound of moving furniture and then a thud. At this time, Hyman decided to investigate this noise and opened the door to his noisy neighbors. He noticed 3 men who he couldn't recognize. Other passengers corroborated his story, stating the noise from cabin 9062 and then a thud like a body hitting the canopy or the liner. Some also said they heard a woman scream. Again, others say they saw 4 men walk into the cabin, but only 3 eventually exited. While it is almost easy to say that the 3 men may have been Greg, Rusty, and Zach, the boys were in another cabin at the time. Their keycard access also proved this. So who were the 3 men in cabin 9062, and what eventually happened to George Smith? Several theories exist as to what must have happened in the wee hours of that tragic day. The first is that of a possible burglary. Eyewitnesses say that George and Jennifer were drunk during their time in the casino, but they soon appeared sober enough, at least, to be able to make their way around. However, when Jennifer was found, she was so inebriated that she couldn't even make her way to her room. This possibly meant that she and her husband were under the influence of stronger drinks than what they had in the casino. In their drunken state, they had spoken of the tens of thousands of dollars in cash that they had on them. George also had a very expensive wristwatch on, and Jennifer had an expensive ring on her finger. This may have led to the burglary of their room. The tiny blood spots must have come from the attempts by the robbers to force his wristwatch off his hand. Another theory was the possibility of an accident. George and his friends had been consuming huge amounts of alcohol, with Atkins introducing absinthe, a high alcohol drink, to them even after they were refused more alcohol servings on the boat. Usually, absinthe has such a high amount of alcohol that it can be fatal to the body, especially when illegally brewed. This theory, however, was ruled out as the bottle of absinthe smuggled on board had been bought in Europe, which regulates the alcohol content allowed in it. The theory around their alcohol consumption suggests that George might have fallen overboard in his drunken state. With none of these theories leading to any direct apprehension of the suspects, the FBI opened their investigation into the case. Jennifer and Lord were interrogated and subjected to polygraph tests, which they both passed. However, this wasn't so for Atkins, as he failed the test. It is not certain if he had anything he was hiding or if the FBI told him that he failed the test to coax him into giving them more information about what happened that day. From all indications, Atkins was being economical with the truth. Another mysterious video soon surfaced, adding to the complexity of what was already a difficult case. In it, some unidentified people were having a conversation in the company of some Russians. One of them was heard saying that they had taught someone a paragliding lesson without a parachute. Although no name was explicitly mentioned, it is not difficult to assume that this might have been about George. As the case lingered, more witnesses and possible suspects were questioned by the FBI. Top on the list included Atkins, Zach, Greg, and Rusty. During their interviews, Zach and Atkins were quite dodgy with their answers, indicating that they were possibly hiding some of what they knew from the authorities. Instead, they invoked their Fifth Amendment rights, which prohibit them from speaking in the absence of legal representatives. Greg had quite a different angle on all that happened that night and emphasized that they were all drunk that night. This impaired their sense of judgment, so he was unable to clearly state what happened that night and the early hours of the next day. It is unclear if he merely used the excuse of their drunkenness to avoid answering the investigators' questions. In his testimony, he also mentioned something that turned out to be untrue. During questioning, he told the cops that he had ordered food to their cabin. However, this was not true because the officials of the ship had been instructed not to serve them due to the noise and nuisance they were constituting. While the order logs were checked, no order proved that he had requested food. Although Greg's testimony, like the other suspects, was filled with lots of unanswered questions and inconsistencies, neither he nor anyone on the cruise was arrested. At the end of the ill-fated cruise, the case was still unsolved. All the suspects seemed to know something about what happened that night, yet there was no substantial evidence for arrest or prosecution. However, something about Greg's statement revealed that he probably knew what had happened. He had told the authorities that George's disappearance was not an accident and insisted that something terrible happened that night. As the news of Greg's disappearance got to his family, they were deeply distraught and began an inquisition to uncover what had happened to their son. Naturally, they blamed the Turkish Authority and the management of the Royal Caribbean for their loss. All efforts to find out what had happened to George proved abortive. The FBI's bureaucratic process only slowed things down, and nothing much came out of their investigations. Left with no other option, Greg's family took their woes to the media with hopes of applying pressure on the FBI and those handling the case. As time went on, their suspicions turned to Jennifer, who they believed had had a hand in whatever happened to her husband.
It's clear that Jennifer's hiding something, so I think that in this case, it wasn't Jen's best.
This is largely because Jennifer remained tight-lipped and defended her behavior by saying she was only acting following the instructions of the FBI. However, in January 2006, after many months, Jennifer was now sure that nothing would come out of the investigation. As a result, she hired a private forensic expert, Henry Lee, who went onto the ship to carry out his investigation. From his findings, he ruled out the possibility of George falling from the balcony because of the height. He also wanted to try out a simulation of a falling doll, but the liner's authority did not allow him to do this. The Royal Caribbean's management was uncomfortable with the negative publicity and wanted the case to go away, while George's family offered reward money of $100,000 for information about their son. The Royal Caribbean reached out to Jennifer for a settlement of a whopping sum of a little over $1 million. To the shock of George's family, Jennifer accepted the settlement fee in June of 2006, barely a year after the tragedy. This further deteriorated the relationship between her and her parent in-laws, who felt betrayed by her actions and continued to insist on justice for their son. The FBI's investigations also came to a dead end. The testimonies of all witnesses and suspects were largely incoherent and inconsistent. Neither their findings nor those of Henry Lee were ever made public. Jennifer mourned her husband for a while and began to carry out charitable deeds in his memory. 4 years later, in 2009, she remarried. George's family continues to be anguished by the tragic, inexplicable disappearance of their son. Following the absence of insufficient evidence, the FBI closed the case, ruling it an accident. To date, no one is sure what happened to George. This has been James, and I hope you enjoyed this story. Let me know who you think is the killer. For more crime of passion stories, like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Thank you.